Good morning, London.
Morning.
Always wanted to do that. I haven't got a slide deck. I usually have a slide deck because I'm treating you like some of the best comedians in the world treat their audiences. They practice their new material without cues, without notes, and hopefully they get a few laughs and they refine the material. They go out into the big world of Netflix and then get cancelled. Hopefully that's not happening here. But we are talking about breaking out of your comfort zone, and I thought it'd be a bit nuts if I didn't actually demonstrate breaking out of my comfort zone in this talk. What I'm going to talk about, though, mainly, because I tend to break out of my comfort zone all the time, and I suspect some of you who moved towards the front also broke out of your comfort zone, so thank you for that. Makes it look like there are actually few people in the audience. Those at the back, don't worry. I'd be there with you if I was in the audience. But let's talk about resilience, because it's the only subject I can think of in a 41-year career that I actually feel I can talk about with some authority. Because I was pants at work for the longest time. I was an awful employee. I took every perceived slight incredibly personally. I took compliments personally. And I imagined that my talent was enough for me to succeed in the workplace, which of course is a terrible plan. We all know that we live in an era of lifelong learning. But I thought I was the exception to that. I thought I was God's gift to video games, which I was for a little while. But that ran out after about 3 years, and that was it. So you know what they say, people who spent 30 years in a career have actually only got 1 year of experience and they repeat the next 29. That was the kind of path I was taking. So in order for me to grow, to become more resilient, to break out of my comfort zone, I had to carry on learning, carry on trying new things. But it didn't come naturally, and it came very, very late. What is resilience? Is it a personal attribute? Or is it a skill? I'm not a neuroscientist, but I suspect it is a skill. I was playing Zelda last night, the new one, which I guess makes an old man slightly current, so I'm pleased about that. And I noticed that every time I died, which of course at my age is a lot, I would lose some of my health bar. I thought, okay. So the health bar isn't your resilience, right? That's your strength. That's how strong you are. Your resilience is the speed at which your health bar bounces back up. Now, of course, this is completely applicable to your career, to your life, to everything. So imagine you take a series of knocks at work, be they small or large. How quickly you recover from those knocks and get back to an even keel is your resilience. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about capitalism, which might be controversial, but I believe Notorious B.I.G. got it wrong when he talked about mo money, mo problems. I think it's actually mo problems, mo money. And by that I mean, in capitalism, the idea is that in the marketplace, the more difficult or valuable the problem that you're trying to solve, the more value you will receive in return. That's how capitalism kind of works. I mean, we know there are exceptions. But if you solve very, very small problems that a lot of people can solve in the marketplace, you will not receive much value. And if you're prepared to solve the bigger ones, then you will receive greater value in return. That's the way capitalism works. A good example of this is, who's seen the Bourne films? few of you, do you remember Pamela Landy? Pamela Landy's so cool. So for those who haven't watched, Pamela Landy is a CIA operative, leads a team. And whenever she messes up an operation, she uses it as an opportunity not to get back into her shell, but to advance. It's like, I'm best placed to solve the next big problem. But in order for me to do that, you're going to have to give me more access. So her security level keeps increasing. Obviously, her pay grade keeps increasing. And she does actually solve problems. Not completely, partially, but she uses that. And that is a quality that I didn't have, but I learned it. Now, a bad example of this is, again, not to be too political, but our current Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, is not a particularly good example because she uses setbacks not to advance, but to entrench her position, which when those setbacks are actually her own fault, doesn't help her stay in that position. Now, not having a go at the Home Secretary, I've done this myself. I've used setbacks to try and stay entrenched. And what happened was that my value went down. Oh, that's so good. Let's talk about when I got demoted. For those of you who don't know, I was at PlayStation between 2005 and 2015. Now, I know it was exactly December because the way I planned it was I was going to leave exactly when I'd done 10 years. And I did this because you get a lovely plaque and a £1,000 voucher if you stay 10 years. So that ended up really well. But let's talk about demotion. My first 5 to 6 years at PlayStation, as has been fairly well documented, were pretty terrible. I hated life. I was sick. I was off work a lot. I wasn't resilient. I was fragile. I was a bit of a tosser, actually. I had a chip on my shoulder. I was not valuable to my boss. And one of the biggest mistakes you can make in the modern workplace is to be less than valuable to your boss. Why? Because you know how it is in today's world of work. I know because my children go through this. For every vacant position, there are a gazillion resumes coming through the door. It's very hard to get a good job. And here I had a good job, and I was doing a really poor job of that job. I felt that I was entitled to a promotion without having actually done anything to warrant the promotion. And of course, I would always put this down in my yearly appraisal. I'd say, this embarrasses me to this day, I want to be VP. What an idiot. But what had I done to warrant anything like being able to get to that position? I mean, I'd set out my plan. Yeah, I will do this, I'll do that. I think I'm really valuable. No, you don't say that you're valuable. Because if you have to say it, it means you're not, right? Your work itself should show that you're valuable. Now, how's this relevant? It's relevant because I did eventually get a promotion, but it was a temporary promotion, a trial promotion. I had a bit more responsibility, and if I managed this responsibility well, great. Quids in, more seniority, I feel better about myself. 6 months passed. I'd used my new title in presentations. I remember there was one hosted by Sheridan's, and I used the title in that presentation. I cleared this with my boss at the time. But after 6 months, I had a meeting with my boss, who, to my absolute horror, told me that he felt that in my case, this hadn't worked, and he was going to take it away. Now, I sat down in front of my desk. There's a desk. Can you still hear me at the back? Yeah, good. So I'd sit down over here. There are my desk drawers. I'm on the floor listening to Smithers Jones on loop for 2 days, tidying my drawers. That's not resilient, right? That's entitled, and it's unprofessional. But I was so upset, I felt I was completely warranted in sitting there on the floor at PlayStation, no less, in front of my drawers, thinking this is an okay thing to do. But in my head, I was utterly distraught. It felt like the complete and final humiliation. And I really wanted to quit. How fragile was I? The absolute opposite of resilience. So I saw some sense and decided I'd take a couple of days off just to think about things, you know. Don't do anything hasty. I wanted to quit, but I had nothing to go to. And here's the thing, in my state of mind, what job would I have got? I mean, I barely got the job at PlayStation. It's only because I made an effort for my second interview. Yeah, I got turned down for the first interview because, again, I was arrogant, entitled, and felt I could just walk it because of my talent. And I took those 2 days off, and I had a good think about where I'd gone wrong. I thought, it's me. Hi, I'm the problem. And I remembered that about a decade before, I'd read some books on positive psychology. Now, some of the stuff I'm going to talk about, I'm not saying you should do this. I'm relating my story, hopefully, so that you find a point to resonate with. So don't take any of this as prescriptive. Please see it as illustrative, and hopefully you'll be able to use something from it. But I remember a lot of these books about positive psychology, and I thought, maybe there's something in that nonsense. You know, because I was very dismissive about that literature. I thought it was all very hocus pocus and airy-fairy. And being a programmer by trade, I didn't trust in such things. It was all binary for me. Of course, we know the world to be less than binary, or rather, much more than binary. And I had this dusty old volume by Brian Tracy called Maximum Achievement, secondhand. I just found the cover hokey. So it's a good thing it's kind of like faded. Maximum Achievement. Ugh. But I read it anyway. And you know what? That was it. It's not always a book, right? It's not always a talk. It's not always the content. It's who you are at the time. And where I was at that time was at the lowest of the low, thinking that my career in video games was done, that I was useless. So here I am, on the one hand, thinking I'm talented. On the other hand, there's a part of me thinking I'm utterly useless to anybody. And the thing that changed everything for me was Brian Tracy insisting that I take full personal responsibility for everything. Now that hit me very hard. Okay, that's really interesting. So I'm a type 1 diabetic, for those who don't know, and for much of my life I've been very poorly controlled, which means a roller coaster of health, a roller coaster of emotions, because of course badly out of control blood sugar affects you hormonally like nothing else. And ask my wife, she knows. A low blood sugar rebounding to a high turns me into the most miserable person. Thankfully, it doesn't happen as much as it used to. An extreme version of hangry. Imagine hangry multiplied by the worst hangover you've ever had, and Jack Nicholson in The Shining, right? That's me. Every day at PlayStation. And I thought, okay, full personal responsibility. For my health? Seriously? But there's nothing I can do about my diabetes. Absolutely nothing. Or is there? Well, okay, I'm not talented, I don't know it all. I remember being such a smart ass with all the doctors when I was a kid. I know everything there is to know about diabetes, says the 9-year-old. Yeah, okay. And they would just shake their heads. And I remember my GP telling me that I would be dead if I carried on like this, long before I was 40. 17 years beyond that, I'm now 17 years old and still alive, because I did turn things around at that point and realized that if I was to take control of my diabetes, it might be a good idea to learn a bit about it. So I did. And one interesting thing that I found that relates massively to resilience is that the smaller the input, the smaller the output. Now, me being a programmer, that makes complete sense, right? So input for diabetics, and for some of you, I would imagine, and especially for type 1 diabetics, means carbohydrates. Now, we all love ourselves some carbohydrates, and I was having a muffin and latte every morning. Guess what that was doing? It was sending me to sleep under my desk for 20 minutes, because I was also massively overweight, exhausted constantly, and so I needed to have a nap at lunchtime instead of eating, because my blood sugar was going up and down, and I was getting the extreme physiological response to that crash that most normal people get. That's normal people. So if you reduce the amount of carbohydrates going in, you reduce the amount of insulin that you need. Well, that means your blood sugar stays more level. And if your blood sugar stays more level, your mood stays more level. And if your mood stays more level, you're on an even keel. And if you're on an even keel, guess what? You get more work done. If you get more work done and you're feeling generally good, that's amazing. Now, you all, diabetic or not, will experience mild blood sugar swings. I'm like a car without the shock absorbers, right? You lot have got shock absorbers, but you're still going to feel the bumps. You'll feel the bumps in your mood. Okay, what am I going to do about this? Well, I'm pretty overweight. I was well over 100 kilos at the time. Okay, first thing I'm going to do with my diabetes, I'm not going to eat. Pretty extreme. I'm not going to have breakfast, not going to have lunch, and I'm going to have no carbs for my dinner. Because, as I say, over 100 kilos, and I know I need to do something about my weight. So that's what I did. And we'll come to that later and how that worked out. So, the main thing I want you to take away from this bit about my demotion and how I handled it is that accepting personal responsibility is not about accepting blame. It's about saying, this has happened. Accepting the world as it is and not how you would like it to be. And that's just a framing. And if you can reframe your view of the world so that you see the facts rather than the way your emotions colour those facts, you're in a much better position to respond. And that's the thing. With personal responsibility, all you're responsible for is your response to events. Yes, the events are out of control. You're not necessarily blameworthy for what's happened, but you are responsible for what happens next, rather what you choose to do about it next. And so I took that to heart, and I started to act massively. Now, mental pain. Recent studies have shown that we experience mental pain in our brains the same ways we experience physical pain. Who knew? Heartbreak's a real thing, right? Isn't it? It's interesting. When you feel mental pain, do you not feel it in your body? Different people feel it in different places. Who here has felt mental anguish almost, or actually as if it was physical? Very few exceptions. In fact, if I was wearing glasses, I might be able to give you an accurate answer. But I saw a lot of hands go up, and I haven't been drinking. Apart from this. So, anyway, I came up with this fancy framework which I hope you won't mind indulging me with. And that is, you might think that what you're feeling is purely mental. But that's the funny thing about our brains, right? Our brains think that they're the Prime Minister, when actually they're just the press secretary. Things are going on in there, right? And then you ascribe ideas to what's actually happened. There have been lots of experiments to show that what's going on in the brain happens long before we've decided what to make of it. And so maybe what you're feeling is not entirely mental. Maybe it's physiological. So the framework is, I hope I can remember this, because I'm not going to read from the card because it makes me look clumsy, and we don't want that, because that's not breaking out of your comfort zone, is it? So, famished, angry, cold, tired. If you feel any of these things, you're not going to be thinking right. You're not going to be thinking to the best of your ability. Very often, it's one of those things that makes you feel the way that you feel. Please don't misunderstand. I'm not saying this is always the case, right? So, for example, if your boss gives you a lashing in front of your colleagues, I don't mean a literal lashing. I hope nobody has experienced that. I certainly haven't. But if a boss gives you a tongue lashing in front of your colleagues, that's out of order. No good boss should do that. I'm talking about other things. I'm talking about, for example, the boss says something to you in a meeting, or says something to me in a meeting, and I respond sarcastically. And afterwards I think, why did I do that? And it's because I was exhausted, right? So if you haven't taken care of your physiological needs, then you might ascribe your reaction to an emotion when actually it was physiological. So, for example, I might be triggered by hunger or extreme hunger. And what was actually going on at the time was I was thinking, oh, I'm angry. Why am I angry? Why did I respond that way? Why was I brutal to a colleague? And again, not physically brutal. Let's be clear here. But sometimes you can say something to a colleague that you deeply regret. And it's not always because you were spoken to in an unreasonable way. It might be that the way you were spoken to was completely reasonable. But you responded out of a physiological deficit. And so what I'm going to say to you is, if you can learn to manage your energy, that gives you a tremendous advantage in achieving the required equanimity to respond appropriately. So for me, fasting worked. I'm not saying it'll work for you, but what it meant was after a couple of days, I was in heavy ketosis. My brain was superfueled. I was no longer doing this with my emotions and with my blood sugars. I was healthier. I had more stamina. I had more energy. I remember one day bouncing into the office, absolutely off on one, like someone possessed of messianic zeal. And my right-hand man, Lorenzo, bless him, who was close to quitting before I turned into this freak, he thought I'd completely lost it. And you can understand why. One day, right, 5 o'clock. All right, Lorenzo, see you tomorrow, mate. The next day, I'm there at 7 in the morning, dressed like this, at PlayStation. Yeah, no one dresses like this at PlayStation, not even the VPs, okay? So, next day, I'm there in a suit. I'm bouncing up and down. I've got more enthusiasm than I've had in years because I'm putting stuff from Brian Tracy in practice. And also, I'm feeling this extreme joy at having found my energy again. It's sensational. So my point here is, physiologically I changed, not emotionally. Physiologically, I now had the basis for delivering to the best of my ability. Now, I like fact. I think it's good. I was actually thinking about going with hungry. Oh my God, what was it? It was really good. You're going to like this. Oh, what was it? That was it. Hungry, uncomfortable, exhausted, and livid. I reached out to Huel, though, and they decided not to sponsor this talk. So screw them, we're going with fact. I'm going to talk to you about a project that I did that will give you some idea about how these processes of physiological and mental transformation in building up your resilience helped me out. I haven't got too long, so I'll wrap it up quite quickly. I came up with the amazing idea of ripping off Kickstarter. You can see I was full of myself, right? I presented it just as an idea to my bosses, who kind of gave me the nod and, yeah, okay, whatever. And eventually I heard back from one of my many bosses who said that somebody on my team had also come up with this idea and that I should work with Robin on this idea. Now, this is early in my transformation. And you can imagine how I felt. Who wants to take a guess at what I felt that I had to share the development of my idea with a colleague? Go on, shout it out. Yeah. Angry. Angry. Furious. Livid. No, we can't use livid. That's the Huel thing. Not doing that. I was angry. But something has changed by this point. I've not gone off the handle. I'm not sitting down next to my desk playing Smithers Jones on loop for 2 days anymore. No, we're bigger than that now. So I did my first self-intervention. And that is, when you feel anger, take a deep breath, get out of the situation. I used to teach this to some of my team who used it when they got extremely angry in meetings, who would say, I need a moment. If you can train yourself just to do, who's been that angry in a meeting where they've blurted something out? You don't have to raise your hand for this because it might be compromising, right? But you might have said something in a meeting that you regretted out of anger. And I'm not saying you would have expressed it as angrily as I used to, but maybe later you regretted it. I would say if you feel so angry that you feel the need to speak immediately, excuse yourself from the meeting. There's no problem doing that. Just say anything. Need the loo. That's it. Get up. Go. Why? Because the amount of damage you could do by saying something without being conscious is incalculable. You're far too valuable to let that happen. So that's what I did. I heard what was being told. I got up, went to the bathroom, went into thankfully it was empty, men's loos on the 7th floor at PlayStation, went into a cubicle, closed the door, slammed my fists against the door, and roared as quietly as I could. I didn't want Jim Ryan walking in on me roaring in the bog, smashing the doors down, right? That would not be cool. I took some deep breaths. I stepped out of the cubicle, looked in the mirror, and I saw this angry individual breathing hard. I thought, okay, take some deeper breaths. Do some box breathing, because I learned that. And I asked myself a really simple question. What would Tony do? Tony was my boss, Tony Clark, best boss I've ever had. And I remembered. So I straightened myself up. Shoulders back, deep breaths. Walked out across the floor to Robin, shook his hand and said, I hear we're going to be working together on Project Democrat. I'm really looking forward to it. Big smile on my face. Now this guy's a Swede, cool as a cucumber. Looks amazing, bastard. And he's amazed. Well, what happened to you, man? That's the look he's got on his face. Normally nothing makes him crack a smile, but he's cracking the most Swedish smile you could imagine, in a nice way. Now, I'm going to bring this to a close. I've got about 5 more minutes, I think. The key thing here is the project eventually got declined. Robin was not happy. He's a cool Swede, but he's not happy, and he shows it. Me, I'm like, I'm sanguine. Okay, not this one, maybe another one. A lot has changed, see? Because I've learned to see the world as it is, not as I would like it to be. And what that means is, I know how people at the upper tiers operate. I've seen them do it. It's scary. They're solving big problems and they're doing it way faster than I can. And they're managing a lot more stress than I can. More problems, more money. That's why they get paid the big bucks. I was once in an exec meeting with Jim Ryan and his team, and they were going through these enormous decisions, one after the other, in series. Jim and the team are going, one sentence and then yes, another sentence and no. Let's put that on the back burner. No, let's do it this way. I'm absolutely bewitched. What is going on here? How can they make such big decisions so quickly, on the back of which jobs depend, right? So I realize now that this is what happens, and there must be a really good reason why this has happened. It's not blind faith, it's because I've seen it happen. The interesting thing, the interesting outcome from this is I was promoted not long after that, and Tony told me that the biggest factor in me getting my promotion was the way in which I took that no. Final story. When I started this process, I was 102 kgs. My knees were battered. I needed operations. I'd had the operations, but if you're carrying 102 kilos on 5'8", okay, 5'7", it's going to hurt. The diabetes had wrecked me. I couldn't bend over to pick up anything off the floor. But I realized I needed to start exercise. So I'd started my fasting at this point, low carbs, low calories. I'm beginning to feel better. I used to play table tennis when I was a kid. If you can find something that will build up your strength, that means you'll be able to take knocks better. So physical exercise, absolute must. Richard Branson was once asked, what's the one thing you could do to improve your chances of success? And he thought about it for a few seconds, leant back in his chair, thought about a few more seconds, and he came back with work out. Yeah? So there I am playing table tennis on the ground floor in the cafeteria with Sam, the best player in the company. He's one of the security people. Lovely guy. Miss him. And he's battering me, but he's doing it really gently, okay? Just enough to make me cry. Quietly. I've learned by this point. I couldn't pick up the ball. Guy's such a gent, he would go and get the ball for me. I wanted to cry, but I carried on. 1 year later, I'm now 82 kgs. I've lost 20 kilos. I'm at the top of my game at PlayStation, having done the fact thing, not the Huel thing. And I'm playing Sam again. And he's absolutely smashed the ball to an impossible position. I fly over, I return it, win the point, and give the classic table tennis victory shout. Chaw! And as I'm doing this, Jim Ryan and the execs are walking through the cafeteria, and they're applauding my point. So, I'm a better ping pong player. I've just scored an amazing point against the best player in the company. I'm healthier, fitter, and stronger by making a few very small changes. I'm making better decisions because now that I'm on an even keel, I'm able to do things like separate the event from my response. I breathe, I think, I respond. I'm not tossed about by life, by work. And because of these techniques, my speed of bouncing back has improved. And that happens just because you practice. All of the things that I did, I practiced. So, for example, my responses at work, I practiced. I role-played with myself. What would I do in this situation? What would I do in that situation? And I learned from those who were better at it than I was. And in terms of building that resilience, I don't think it's an attribute. I think it is a skill. And I think every one of us can develop it. And I don't think anything else will give you not just more value in the marketplace, but more satisfaction in life. Thanks for listening to my TED Talk. Got a few minutes for Q&A if you've got any specific questions or you want to embarrass me about my history. Quite happy to embarrass myself. Uh-oh.
Hi.
Hello.
What do you do when you need to distinguish valid emotions from emotions that aren't necessarily helpful? Like if your boss does literally lash you with a cat o' nine tails.
Okay, so the first thing I should say is all emotions are valuable. There's no such thing as an invalid emotion. All emotions are your body's fastest way of giving you a signal or feedback. So, I mean, you talk about an invalid emotion. I'm imagining you're talking about the emotion springing from something physiological as opposed to psychological. Is that right?
Maybe the emotions you worked to curtail versus an emotion that you need to express. So yeah, maybe physiological versus the other one.
I think you need to acknowledge every emotion, whether it's springing from a physiological source or a psychological source or a situation. Sometimes a situation is so urgent that you need to respond without delay, without thinking. For example, if you're under physical threat, then any physical response is completely valid. Someone threatens you with a literal cat o' nine tails. You better be running out that door, be equipped with a suitable weapon of your own choice, right? But in just about every business situation nowadays, thankfully, not every, but just about every situation, if you can train yourself to breathe in that moment when it's happening, and that only comes through practice. This is what I did at home. I ran through the events in my head of the day, and then I replayed them out loud, took a deep breath as I was feeling those emotions, slowed my breathing down, slowed my heart rate down, and practiced my response. And after about a year of that, I got really good at it. An expression I like to use is get curious, not furious. And that is when something really stressful happens, your first response should be to ask a question. It should be a reflex. If you can develop that, that's a ninja level skill. So, for example, you hear something, you think, I will kill that so-and-so, right? That's your feeling. But if you go, what time was this? First question can be anything. What color is your shirt? I mean, it could be anything, literally. But the first thing that will happen is that the person will be thrown out of frame. They're now on the defensive. Maybe they relate some bad news. Maybe they haven't thought it through. Maybe it's just a mind virus that they're passing on of anger, right? Maybe they're just the messenger. But the first thing you need to do is establish the truth of the situation. And you can do that by very quick interventions. Ask any question. Get curious, not furious. If you can practice that, especially in front of a mirror like I did for a while, you get really good at it. And eventually you find yourself reaching a level of equanimity that's quite impressive. And when your bosses see you do that, they're like, oh, okay, leadership potential here.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hello.
Hi.
What sort of advice would you give your younger, cocky self?
Shut up. Seriously, it would be keep on learning. Keep on learning. You don't know enough yet. You don't know enough yet. You will be great, but not yet. And I'd say it to myself now. Hopefully, my 65-year-old self tells my 57-year-old self to keep on learning, keep going. The best piece of advice I ever got, it's more than once, but where it really counted was from Jim Ryan, hero of mine. I know he doesn't appeal to everybody, but he did wonders for my career and he believed in me. And whenever I'd come to him with some great news about the tiniest thing, because you can imagine the level of decisions he's making, I'd go to him with some really small thing. And his response would always be to smile and say, keep going. So I got some custom Nikes, and it sounds ridiculous. I got some custom Nikes made, which I always wore to work. And they had keep on the right and going on the left. So that's what I would give. That's the advice I would give to my younger self. Keep going. So you think you're doing what? Keep going. You think you've learned enough? Keep going. That's great, but keep going. That's what helps, more than anything, that's what helps build resilience. That you don't think you're done.
That's great, thank you.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you. How do you share what you've learned in your career journey with your team and the people that work with you?
How do I, and how should you?
How do you?
How do I share what I've learned?
With your team, yes.
With my team? Well, I don't really have a prescription for that. I'm very intuitive. I mean, no slide deck, right? Pretty much everything came from my experience. But that comes from many, many years of having practiced public speaking. And that's all techniques. So you build techniques over time, and they become a stack. Sorry, to use modern parlance, your skill stack becomes bigger, you become more valuable, etc. Right? That's part of it. But the one thing I ask younger developers to do is to become the best they can be, to become artists, is to drink deeply from the pool of life. That means read, watch, listen, culture, art, history, science, everything. I hope that wasn't a rude acronym. Good. So become well informed, yes, but much more important than getting well informed, I think, is just enjoying culture. Enjoying art. I mean, we're in the appropriate place for that. It's what makes you a more rounded person. What happens then is that you find ways of expressing your life experiences that are quite inspiring because you start to make loads of connections. And they will spring forth automatically. You don't have to do anything, right? Your brain does that for you. It's a miraculous device. It will make connections for you. Now, when you're young, those connections will be embarrassing. Right, because you've got all kinds of extreme levels of creativity going on. But as you mature, hopefully, those connections are now pretty solid and always connect you to appropriate stories. So for me, it's very intuitive. They'll come to me with an idea or a problem or a situation. They'll want some counsel or some advice. And usually, I'll have something that just comes out, because I've lived a long life and I trust my instincts. That's the other thing. It's okay if you've developed the ability to separate what's going on with how you're going to respond. If you allow the smallest of gaps, two things happen. First of all, you allow your brain to be able to create the information that you need so that it comes out without you having to do too much thinking. You're not thinking about it, right? You're just waiting for the brain to deliver. And the second thing is, it comes off as gravitas. I mean, it's so cool. You think that you're being slow, but people perceive it as you being considered. And you are being considered, because you're not constructing this. I don't take any credit for anything that comes out of my mouth. I know that sounds ridiculous. right? But it's practice, and it's that gap that allows what's already there to come through. And that's all I think the muse is as well. It's, you know, when people who are great writers, you wonder how they come out with it. And they don't. They expose themselves to life. They drink deeply from the pool of life. And they write. And they write for long enough. And it's like the toothpaste, right? That if you leave toothpaste for too long with a cap off, you've got a film over the top, right? And you've got to remove that. And that's the first few paragraphs of writing. And then the toothpaste comes out and it just starts to flow. That's exactly how the muse works, right? You've got to show up. You've got to do this every single day. Same with life. Drink deeply of life every single day. Expose yourself to a wide array of arts, literature, culture, the lot. Live your life. It's not just work. And it will come out.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It sounded like you got to a point where lots of things had built up and sort of in a moment of crisis, you'd eventually found a resolve to sort of address the underlying things that physiologically were causing difficulties in your ability to be resilient. But to get to that point could almost to some degree speak to neglect or lack of oversight or ambivalence. How do you think you could have been managed more appropriately or interventions put in place sooner for you not to reach a moment of crisis like that?
Oh, I think life leaves clues. I think there were lots of mini crises before that. I mean, I've condensed everything into one focal point for the purposes of telling a story. But of course, there were loads of signs. How could I have managed it better? Well, the main thing for me is when I was young, I had a fixed mindset because I was so smart. I have no idea, can't take credit for it. I was reading at 5 what most kids aged 12 couldn't read. Yeah, some people can read, some people can play football. Reading was a thing for me. And so that was not necessarily a good thing. I was also the brightest kid at primary school, not so much at secondary school where I dumbed down to survive. But the fixed mindset hurt me. That was the thing. If you can develop a growth mindset, I'm sure you're all familiar with Carol Dweck's work, then you're much more likely not to be affected by the kind of things that I was affected by, because I thought I was smart enough to get away with just about anything. And that affected my health, it affected my career, it affected my relationships, because I already thought that everything that I needed to bring to the table was already there. And the truth was I needed to keep going. What kind of things could have happened? Well, look, I grew up in a country that was not particularly kind to people of my skin colour. And so some of the issues that I faced would never have been given any kind of notice. Thankfully, schools are much more enlightened nowadays. They have people trained to spot these issues, but not every issue. People still fall through the cracks, and there are all sorts of reasons why people fall through the cracks. But I think in nearly all cases it takes an adult who's paying attention when you're young. And when you're a bit older, I think what helps is if you're able to develop a relationship with a mentor can help greatly. Somebody who can advise you. And it's got to be someone you're prepared to listen to, because if you're not prepared to listen to, then you'd be like me, right? You'd be coming into that relationship with a fixed mindset. And I think it's vital to develop that growth mindset. And I didn't develop that growth mindset until that moment of extreme career crisis. Does that help? Thank you. Okay, I think that's it. Thank you.